Do you ever wonder what makes a rom-com a rom-com? Or a psychological thriller, or a genre? What even is a genre? How does a genre get assigned to something? And what is the purpose in creating that sense of genre? There's so many questions, and today I'm going to attempt to answer those in a little genre analysis. I'm going to be taking 6 films from 3 different genres and then contrasting them with absolutely no mercy, throwing them amongst some theories to mix things about a little bit, and then finish with a little analysis while we're at it just so that everything makes sense. So first of all is the horror genre. I feel like this is something that's quite general, in the way that it's all kind of the same. It all spawns from the same point. So I chose 2 films. I chose Ouija, 2014, the 2014 version, and then I chose Truth or Dare, which is from 2018. Both of these films are quite new, but they do have a lot of ways that you can contrast them to make it quite interesting. So first of all, let's think about some similarities, right? Both storylines essentially just follow the lives of 2 groups of teenagers as they play an old traditional game which is somehow haunted and ends up cursing them the whole rest of the film. They lose friends along the way, they argue, all that, all to find ways to release themselves from that curse. But an important part is that even by the end it still doesn't feel resolved, which is really common under the horror genre. Talking more technically, whilst it is common for horror to have more sharp twists and turns in the storyline, the camera movements in both is something that really stuck out to me in the similarities. I particularly loved the use of the pan to introduce the setting in Ouija. I found that really helpful. But the lighting in both is something that strikes me so much and outweighs everything else that I could possibly find, because it just builds so much atmosphere and just makes the film really, I think. However, it's not all similar. Let's talk about Truth or Dare. Now, Truth or Dare is quite an interesting one because the lighting in it isn't very typical of the horror genre. It tends to be quite average, everyday looking, which is quite fun. I mean, it kind of intertwines that kind of teen drama kind of genre in with the high-key lighting and whatnot. But the few scenes where low-key lighting is used, for example, the street scene here, are very effective because they stand out to the rest of them. This could be seen as something called binary opposite, I think, if I'm right on that. The lighting here is used to build tension to show how alone and vulnerable Lucas is out on the street at night. In a way, it makes the viewer feel more immersed into the scene, especially with the practical lighting of the street lights. It sort of builds a sense of home, if you know what I mean. I don't know if that's kind of weird. It helps build character too, because at this point in the film, Lucas is kind of presented as a more dominant role who kind of saves everyone else. So putting him into this kind of situation where he's having to fend for himself and he's clearly struggling is quite interesting, and I like it. On the other hand, we're talking about Ouija, which is a lot more classic for a horror film. In Ouija, there's barely any daylight, which is really common in horror. Practical lighting is used a lot in candles and candelabras and more old-fashioned kind of lamp-looking things. But I find the use of practical lighting interesting because it's not just used to create a sense of home like in Truth or Dare, but I also feel like the warmth of the practical lighting contrasts the low-key lighting of the rest of the film to kind of create some kind of conflict, which can kind of be inferred by the characters and what they're going through at that time. This is really clear in the Killer Christmas Lights scene. The deadpan expression that Debbie's got and the silence that's surrounding it really builds that tension to show that something real yucky and morbid is going to happen. I do think that the lighting being quite everyday for a home is quite useful because it sort of makes the audience feel unsettled by the fact that this could be in their home, and that's something that really scared me about this film when I watched it, because there's no big crazy unrealistic things going on. It's just some people in a house who are being haunted by these demons, and it's really scary. Next, let's have a little chat about rom-coms. Juno and 5 Feet Apart are the 2 films that I chose for this because they've got a good amount of similarities, but they've also got quite a lot of differences, whereas I felt like with the horror genre it's quite hard to find the differences between them. In similarities, they're both a witty teen comedy about the main character facing a problem in their life and then working to overcome it, even though the problems are quite different, and they both do pose a very strong emotional journey for the viewer. I know that I struggled a lot watching both of them. I found that I could put Todorow's narrative theory to this because at the end of 5 Feet Apart, it concludes with the main characters having to split for the better of both of them. It's really bitter and tough to see that after they've had such a battle, they've had to split for the better of both of them. Although the opposite happens in Juno, The final scene is of Bluko and Juno outside the house singing Anyone Else But You by the Moldy Peaches, which is a really good song, by the way. But I like this because they use the idea of a narrative in a completely different way, but then they both come back round to the new equilibrium. I find Juno a really comforting movie, and I feel like that's partly because it's about such a serious topic, but it's got like a really good balance of comedy and then like the awareness that this is a topic that's going to be painful for some people. I think that the way of building character in Juno is really, really clever, and the colour kind of contributes to that as well because it's used in such an artificial way, but it really fits the indie rom-com kind of vibe, but in a really cool way. Sense of seasonal times created through the saturated autumnal colours, which are woven throughout the film, which makes it feel so much more warm and friendly. You can kind of see what I mean here, this scene of many. This is the Doodle Can't Be Undid clip. I like the subtlety of the colour in contrast with the theme. It makes it feel oddly nostalgic, which can link to Juno's inner dialogue spoken throughout as they struggle to overcome these problems, and I find that inner dialogue so helpful in building character. That's another thing that I really noticed about this film. On the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of visuals lies 5 Feet Apart. This film is completely opposite of being saturated. It's cold grey colours throughout. The only exception to this, which is definitely very done on purpose, is the scene where Will has to say goodbye to Stella at the window. I love this because the contrast is so much stronger when it's put in between the rest of the film, which is just grey and dull, which obviously is because they're in a hospital. The fact that all of the light in that film, all of the warmth of the light is concentrated into that one little scene really shows that they've brought light into each other's lives, and now that they have to leave, it's all kind of coming up to the surface. 5 Feet Apart contrasts rom-com and drama within its own genre, which also works under the Steve Neill theory. Juno opposes to prop since none of the characters really play up to the archetypes that are given in the theory. Both of these films are really different, which shows the versatility of the rom-com genre, so it's not all corny. Finally, we're going to look at comedy, and we're going to be looking at Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and Swiss Army Man. To be fair, the only storyline based similarity that I can think of is that they're both based on an island. But moving on, first, Swiss Army Man. To me, this film feels like it's stripped directly from a list of ways to make a successful comedy. The lighting in it is pretty average looking, but this works well because the reason they're on the island in the first place is because they got stranded, so it makes a lot of sense that they wouldn't have a lighting crew there. To me, the bus montage was one of the most memorable scenes. The music, the lighting, and the costume are also different to the rest of the movie. The colours get warmer and the movie intensifies all whilst. The final film that I'm going to be talking about today is Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. I feel like I can't speak about comedies without talking about Mamma Mia because it's one of the most feel-good summer films I've ever seen. The colour's really vibrant throughout as we watch Donna embark on her eventful journey to Greece. The conventions are very typical in comedy, borderlining it into being a rom-com, which makes it very predictable, but I think it does work well. I like the fact that it's played in the 70s to kind of pay tribute to ABBA, which is where the music for the film came from. You can tell from the way that this film's done, and the cast, of course, that it was really high budget as well. But it did pay off for the payoff, grossing $402.3 million. Pretty good going. The overview, I found that comedy is quite hard to contrast because it just spans over so many areas and engulfs so many other genres that it's hard to kind of find a common ground between them. But both of them do have the warm, high-key lighting, which is one of the most important conventions of comedy films, along with the music being so energetic. I think that these films both do fit Steve Neill's genre theory because they both take the route of similarities and don't sway from that too much, because the theory is about recognising a genre through similarities and differences. There's one exception that I can think of for this, and that's only when in Swiss Army Man, Manny dies and Hank's so upset and just refuses to accept it because that's sad. That's not comedic, is it? But that weaves in the little bit of difference in the theory that is so vital in making it stand out. So that concludes our genre adventure. I hope that this video wasn't too chaotic, and I hope that it helped. And I hope that now you can watch any film on the whole entire planet and be like, I know what that is. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.